And this guy begins to share with him how dreadful life is, and he's lost custody of children, he's been inside in prison, his life is he's at the end, he said, and he really has wanted to take his life on many occasions. He said, but for the last year he's been kept alive by one thing. Every morning at 3:16 he gets woken up. He has no idea why at 3:16 he's been woken up for a whole year. But because he so wants to know why he's been woken up at 3:16 every day, it's kept him alive. And so he looks at this guy and goes, you're religious. Please help me. Does 3:16 mean anything to you?
Welcome, everybody. This is Simon Gilbert, Inspired. Great to be back for another fantastic week of encouragement. If you're new to us, I think we've all just had enough of being relentlessly bombarded by negativity in the press that just induces fear and cynicism, anxiety. And what we need is dollops of good news. And there's loads of good news to be heard. And there's loads of cool people doing great stuff around the world. And this week, I've got no doubt you're going to be inspired because we've got with us the wonderful Rachel Jordan-Wolfe. How are you, Rachel?
I'm good, thank you, Simon. Lovely to be with you.
Brilliant to have you. So Rachel is the Executive Director of Hope Together, which is a charity that partners with churches to reach their communities with the gospel. Our paths have overlapped at Spring Harvest. You've done loads of stuff with the Evangelical Alliance. I love the Talking Jesus research that you've been a key sort of shaper of. So there's lots to get into, Rachel, but let's just crack on with it. How did you first come to know Jesus?
So I knew that I knew Jesus from knowledge, like from even my infancy. So sort of right from the beginning, I love that Psalm 139, that even in my mother's womb, suddenly that relationship was started. So my parents both are wonderful, wonderful Christians. And I grew up in the most extraordinarily beautiful family of faith. And therefore, as I learned to walk, and as I learnt to talk, I learnt to walk with Jesus, and I learnt to pray. As I learnt to read, I learnt how important it was to read the Bible. And so from those first faltering steps, I'm still walking. And I haven't changed much, I don't think, really. So my parents have got this hilarious little tape at home of me singing to Jesus when I'm 3. The theology is hilarious, but, you know, the sentiment is the same. And the other day I was up on top of a mountain in Wales, just singing away by myself. And I was reminded that I was born to be a worshipper. And I'm still a worshipper of Jesus. And I was called, born, made. That is what our main purpose in life is to worship and to glorify Jesus. That is it. And then everything else is a secondary. But it has been from my early... when I used to sort of go swimming, I'd do doggy paddle and hum along with Jesus. And so Jesus has always been my best friend. And I've always thought, why doesn't everybody else have such a friend?
Which is great, isn't it? Because, I mean, some of the podcasts we've had, it's been, sex, drugs and rock and roll conversion. But actually, and lots of people will say to me, I haven't got much of a story. But no, what a privilege. It is a privilege, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a complete privilege. This is how did God intend the world to be? And he intended that all people might know him, and that we would even be prayed over in the womb, that we would be born into faith, that we would follow all the days of our life, that we would glorify him, worship him, know him, and walk with him. That's actually what God intended. So never, ever, ever, if your testimony is like that, never be ashamed of the testimony that you have been given of the good news. That actually is from your earliest moments of consciousness that Jesus was part of that. And actually probably in that sense, it is before your consciousness. And I think it is actually a really powerful testimony to say that from that moment all the way through, to know, to be loved by God, what security, what beauty, and that it goes on for eternity. That sense of what I've been called into from the moment of my birth is actually my eternal calling.
Yeah. So you've always had this sort of desire to share your faith with other people. Did that manifest through, primary school, secondary school?
Yes. So I guess I just used to ask my friends along. It's as simple as that. Hasn't changed much. So you asked your friends. So my primary school friend, I had one specific friend. We spent ages and ages together playing imaginary games. And I just took her and brought her along with me, and she found Jesus. And then when I got to senior school, I had more friends. And so I remember distinctly when I said to them, I am going to go to the CU this lunchtime. That moment when you're like, I'm going to say this. And they went, okay, great. Where is it? We'll just all come. and they all came along to the CU with me. So really simple. And then they joined our youth group at church. So yes. And then as people needed, I remember when some of my friends really needed discipling, and I'd read a book. I was a bit older by now. I'd read a book and it was like, do it yourself. I was like, yeah, of course. So I started like a discipleship group for my friends. The first ever thing I ran really was a little kind of Our Faith Club, and it happened in a deserted, I just add that, deserted chicken shed. Down my grandparents had this chicken run, but nobody, the chickens were no longer there. So we took over one of these sheds, we cleaned it all out, and I ran the Our Faith Club on a Sunday afternoon, and that was the first ever thing I led, really.
And I mean, I didn't introduce you as doctor, but you are a doctor, but that's jumping the gun. But were you always academic?
I guess I may not have noticed it. Yeah, but a bit academic. I mean, I have got a doctorate. I suppose that does count as academic. But again, that was it was in pursuing the passions and things that I love that I ended up with a doctorate. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but yeah, I guess I probably am, but I'm not like a ivory tower academic.
Yeah.
That would finish me off. I'm definitely a be with the people one.
Yes.
If that makes sense. If you locked me in an ivory tower with lots of books and came back to see after a while how I was doing, I would not be doing well.
Yes, you don't sound like an ivory tower academic, which is that's a compliment. But so I think back to my university days at Loughborough. I was turbocharged. Those were very fruitful years for me. How about you? Where did you end up?
Didn't go to uni. So just wanted people to know about Jesus. So instead of going to uni, I started off on a Youth for Christ bus. So I remember some Youth for Christ people coming to church, and that's where I first learned how to step out and like begin to speak to people, say on the streets. And we had this double-decker bus that came and worked with our church, and I was like, this is amazing. First time you do it, you're a bit like, oh, and then I was like, oh yes. So I guess I realised that the evangelism that had been natural in a natural sphere, it could grow to something larger. So I went off with Youth for Christ. We had a double-decker bus, and we went round the schools and the council estates in Norwich. I went from that, I worked with Oasis, with a hostel for young adults for a little bit. And then it led me to do a DTS with YWAM, and then it led me to the red light district of Amsterdam. So that was my university. It was a very different experience, the red light district of Amsterdam.
I worked in the red light district in Hamburg, so you can sort of picture, I think those are the two most famous ones, the Ripperbahn and Amsterdam's one. So I can picture what it's like. Go on, give us some positive stories from a very dark place.
Oh, it was a bit of a crazy place. So, you would walk out of the door and have to step over the drug addict on the doorstep, and then if you went to the supermarket, there'd be somebody having some bizarre experience by the yogurts. So you got very used to it. And obviously, I don't know it would be best for people who hadn't ever been. But if they have, you realise that there's just all these hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of women trapped in the most horrendous situations. I mean, horrendous situations as they stand in their window. We used to go around with a basket and offer coffee. And just, it was a doorway in where we could be there and listen. So one day, I was dashing out of the red light district of Amsterdam, and there was this big church. We lived opposite the Oude Kerk, and there was another big church just round the corner. So I was running off to the other YWAM base down the canals, and I was late, Simon. So I was in a bit of a rush. And on the steps of this church, obviously there's always people sitting on the steps of the church. It's a great place to sit. And I just felt the Lord saying to me, oh, you need to talk to that woman. Like of all the people on the steps, that one. And I'm like, oh, Lord, so sorry, I'm a little bit late. Do you think she could hold, or, but that, when you get that overwhelming sense that you must talk. So I'm like, okay, I'm late anyway. I'm just going to be super late. And I always think the gospel is often inconveniences us. Yeah. It's a beauty of it, isn't it? It's a bit how Jesus did it. He was always on the way somewhere when he had these amazing encounters. So I was like, okay. So I go over and I start to say, hello, I'm Rachel, blah, 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 blah. And she's just blah, 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 in Spanish. I don't speak one word of Spanish. So I'm like, well, I've obviously got this wrong. So I smile and I think, well, I'll just pray for her. So I do this. You can't see that, can you? I do put my hands together in a sort of symbol for prayer, and I point at her and I point at me so that she realises I'm going to pray for her. And I say lots of Jesuses, because Jesus translates really closely in lots of different languages. So I'll do that, and then hopefully she'll know that I'm this Jesus person praying for her. Best I can do. So I start praying using lots of Jesuses. And she bursts into tears. And I'm like, oh no, now I've got a howling Spanish woman on the steps and I'm really late. So like, now what do I do? So I did a sort of like another hand signal for walk and coffee. Walk, you, me, coffee. And so she nods. So she follows me about a metre behind, back into the red light district, into the cleft where I lived. I open the door, sort of pop her down and get her a Spanish tract. I'm like, at least she now knows exactly what we're about. And then I grab a teammate and I said, look, I've got no idea what's happening in this woman's life, but could you take her around to the Spanish-speaking social workers round the corner, because I'm really, really late. And then I dash off. And so my teammate takes her round the corner. And she was South American. She had been trafficked in, as many of them had. She was married with 3 children back in South America. She'd been promised a job to work as a seamstress. She'd arrived, had her passport removed, and been told she needed to be a prostitute to pay back her airfare. And she had gone to the steps that morning and she had prayed to the Lord. She'd prayed, God, if you were there, will you help me? And God had said, oh, I know. Rachel, will you talk to this woman? And they were able, obviously, they were better able because they could speak Spanish to work with her than we were. And it taught me how important it is just to listen for the nudge and to be open. And I just love encounters like that, Simon. It's like the woman at the well. Yeah. And do you remember that? I love the first verses of that in John 4, where Jesus says, I was tired. He was tired and he sat down, tired, thirsty, a little bit exhausted, but he still had time and space for that extraordinary encounter where the God of the whole universe paused and helped a broken woman. And we all need to remember that sometimes that is what God is asking us to do. Even in the busyness, we need to pause and listen and be available.
Yeah. Now, if you've worked for YWAM, you have to have stories of God's provision, because you live by faith, you've got no money, you're always poor. Go on, share. It doesn't have to be YWAM specific, but tales of God where you know that He stepped in. I love it. It's so faith building.
So when I first started with Youth for Christ, it is that thing. And I would wait for, money would come through in an envelope, things like that. So, I just relied on my wonderful friends and family and church community that I would survive. And one day I had some money, enough to buy some summer shoes. And I really did need some summer shoes, Simon. So I was in Cromer. Don't know if you've ever been there. Norfolk coast. Little place, really. It's lovely. And we'd been doing a school club and I had some time before the next one. And I thought, I'll go and see if they've got any summer shoes. They've got a few shops, not many, not like a big high street. So I potter along and I just make that classic mistake of popping into a clothes shop first. So I pop into this like small boutique-y clothes shop and I see this shorts and top, summer, beautiful, red, floral. Honestly, it was in back then. And I pop on and I go into the changing room and I try on these shorts and top. And then I'm like, you can't afford these. They look fabulous. They're a great colour, but you can live without them. You don't need them and you can't afford them. So I put them back and I go along and I get my summer shoes. 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in the Youth for Christ office and a parcel comes in the post. And I open this parcel, Simon. And guess what is in there?
No.
Red shorts and top. Exactly the same size and colour as I had tried on in the shop in Cromer.
Love that.
Nobody was there but my Heavenly Father. He was the only person in the changing room with me. But he also thought they looked crackingly good. Oh. And so when a really good friend of mine, who was a trainee nurse down in Brighton, thought she would bless me, she took a friend with her and said, my friend will never buy anything extravagant or nice for herself. She'll use the money, really sensibly, but I want to buy her like a generous gift. And so come shopping with me. And so they went, I think it was into the Brighton lanes, and this friend who doesn't know me picked out this shorts and top. They got sent in a parcel and I opened them 2 weeks later. And I knew in that moment that if God can orchestrate to get me exactly the same colour, shape, style and everything, shorts and top, he could do the rest. And it stood with me for the test of time, because I was probably 18 or 19 when that happened. And so for many years, if I'm struggling to remember, can God provide? He can provide, and he can do it way, way, way more and better than you can ever dream or imagine.
That is so good. First day I arrived in war-torn Burundi, I'd had most of my money stolen. I found an internet cafe. I said, guys, amongst other things, I said, guys, pray, I need a computer. And a friend of mine, this is my first email ever in Burundi, of probably 190,000 emails over a 20-year period. I need a computer. That morning, a mate of mine in Whitehall, in London, woke up and prayed, God, I just feel like you're telling me to give my computer to someone. Show me who. And he switched it on and got this message from Central Africa. And it was so faith building for him as well as for me, because, we all get to be part of this kingdom. You could be listening right now. You could be that friend who has that nudge to be super generous, to provide for another Rachel somewhere. And I'm sure she was incredibly impacted, wasn't she?
Yes. Yeah, completely blown away. And that's the thing, isn't it? Again, it's back to that whisper of the Spirit, isn't it? So back to being intuitive and in tune, because you just don't know how God is going to use you. You just never know. That if you do your piece of faithfulness and what God builds on top of it, amazing kingdom miracles.
Yeah, I love it that we all get to be part of this. And generosity can be financial. It can also be with words. So I make it a real thing to shoot off sort of WhatsApp voice note messages to encourage people, or emails, or just a quick text. Say, it's just when someone comes across my mind, like that could be just coincidence, but actually it could be a total game changer. And again, listener, you can do that. Who's God brought across your mind today, and just shoot them a mail. They could be at the lowest ebb, and that just pulls them around. Yes. Okay, so we don't have to do this chronologically, but where are we at this stage? We're at Amsterdam. Did you, between those different things you said was your university, the YFC, all that, did you experience God's clear calling? I'm always interested how he orients our steps as we trust him.
Yeah, I think for Amsterdam in particular, yes. I felt a really strong sense of calling. So I felt a pretty strong sense of calling to go into evangelism. And I remember it was difficult. So I did apply to go to uni. I just never went. And in retrospect, it looks like I had this extraordinary plan for my life. But like when you step out at the beginning, it's all looking a little less so. Yeah. But now if I spin round, it's like all the steps join up beautifully. It just looks like there was a plan. Of course, there was a plan. You don't know the plan when you first step out, do you? So I felt that strong sense, I should do this. And not everybody around me thought it was necessarily the best idea, but they were willing to back me and say, if that's what you really think you should be doing, then we'll get behind you in it. And then Amsterdam was quite a big step. I'd come from the Brethren, and it's a very different world, the red light district of Amsterdam. And I sometimes think that my parents had to have way more faith than I did, because they had to let I was still very young, their little girl sort of, go off and have this adventure in the red light district. But I went to visit to see what I thought about it all and try and find out more about the team. Even that was crazy. This is before mobile phones. And I remember going, and then no one turned up to pick me up. No one turned up to connect with me as I got off the coach. I was there hours later wondering what on earth to do, trying to find a telephone box, not sure whether to get back on a coach or not to England. And what did I do? I didn't know anywhere. I didn't know anything. Didn't know how to find them. And I think I just kept ringing and ringing, and they're like, oh, so sorry, we were all off. I can't remember what they were doing. Anyway, eventually somebody came to find me. And then when I was out there, a passage of scripture had really spoke to me in Isaiah, and it was really strong, and it really spoke to me. And I was sort of holding it about rebuilding the walls and helping the broken women. It was a very powerful passage. And I was like, yes, Lord, I feel really called to this. And then I came back, and we were doing this crazy mission with Youth for Christ all over different villages in Norfolk. And I was sitting with one of my colleagues, and we were by a duck pond. I remember it, by this duck pond. And he said, oh, look, let's pray and see what God says about this. And I was like, okay. And then I remember thinking a bit, sometimes, you have those moments of like, well, what's God going to do? Is a duck going to come over and quack Amsterdam? And of course, as he prayed and listened, the Lord laid exactly the same verses and passage on his heart, and he spoke them out for me. And I hadn't told anybody, and I knew then that I should go. And that gave me that strength and that certainty to go off on this slightly crazy adventure from the girl from the Brethren who ended up looking, in a very different world, quite frankly. But it was an amazing place to be and a great training ground.
So go on. God is building these different blocks of your life. What was coming next?
Well, actually, the next bit of block was quite hard. So I loved it. I was out there. We were speaking to people, but it's quite a strain living in the middle of the red light district of Amsterdam. You never have a moment when you don't feel like there is just this huge, enormous need. And I probably hadn't learnt much about pacing myself, Simon. So I was still trying to live at the intense summer mission that you go at all out, all on. And I hadn't worked out that even though I was young, I couldn't live at that pace. And so eventually I just couldn't carry on. I actually was very ill, but I didn't realise what was wrong. As it was, eventually I worked out I had glandular fever, but at the time, we didn't work that out. And I remember I realised I was going to have to come home. I couldn't work out, I trusted, I'd followed the call. And probably almost at the 2-year mark. And I couldn't understand why this would happen to me. I just couldn't carry on anymore. I had nothing left to give. And I went to church one morning, realising that it was all sort of falling in, and saw, as I was coming out of church, I was getting on the tube, the metro in Amsterdam. And I saw on the station platform, Grandpa Lyle. We all called him Grandpa Lyle. He was the grandpa of, the sort of base grandpa. He'd been a missionary in Japan all his life. And his son and wife were leading YWAM Amsterdam at the time. And he was one of those people, do you have a kind of thing, I call them like God oozers. I mean, you almost feel like they can see right through you, like into your inner core. They've kind of got God double vision. And I'm like, oh my word, it's Grandpa Lyle. I don't know if I can cope with Grandpa Lyle today, because he'll just see straight through me and he'll see all that's gone wrong and how difficult this is. Anyway, he comes strolling down the platform. We get onto the metro. And he says to me, Rachel, how are things? And I'm like, I just burst into tears. I said, Grandpa, it's just a disaster. I've got to go home. I don't have anything left to give. It's all broken. And he smiled at me and he said, well, Rachel, I think this is a real test of your faith. He said, so I just want to say one thing to you. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. And he said, and if that doesn't work for you, why don't you grab your Bible, throw it out of the window and go do something else with your life? And then he got up, Simon, and he left the metro.
Wow.
Well, I never forgotten it because it was such absolutely the craziest advice ever in some ways. But of course, he had every confidence. He'd been a missionary in Japan. He'd seen it all before. He knew that I could trust and he knew that God would be there for me faithfully. But his absolute, that shocking thing, and if it doesn't work for you, Rachel, just throw your Bible out the window, go do something else, was such a shock. It was just brilliant advice. And so I just had to carry on trusting, even in the difficulty of not being well. And I had to keep walking and I had to keep trusting and I had to keep believing that God had the path for me, even if I couldn't see my way forward. And of course, Jesus and Grandpa Lyle were correct.
Amen. And you know what? If you've followed Jesus any length of time, you have those seasons. And for me, I'm very into scripture memorization. So that's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, those special verses that we've taught our kids. But I remember through such a season, you've got great verses in Proverbs 16, Proverbs 19. In his heart, a man plans his ways, but the Lord determines his steps. Many the plans of a man's heart, the Lord's purpose prevails. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. And I'm just saying those now because I know there'll be listeners who'll be like, I'm out of control right now. Things aren't going well. I'm not following the script of my script anyway. And I don't like submitting to a higher script writer. This is not how I planned it. And yet, guys, you can trust the Lord with all, not some of your heart. Trust the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him. He will direct your paths. He will make your paths straight. And that's my testimony. That's your testimony, Rachel. I know it is. And again, I mean, flipping out. I've had 2 years of chronic fatigue. I've had 3 spells of that. And did I enjoy that? Did you enjoy your season of glandular fever? Of course not. But my goodness, I've been shaped for the better for it. So in all things, God does work for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. Yeah. So if you're going through a tough time right now, hang on in there, guys. We will get there. God didn't promise us an easy journey, just a safe arrival. Sorry, this is meant to be your podcast, but that's a great story of a guy who was caught in one of these ambushes, and that's how I thought I'd die in Burundi. But he had his face blown off. He survived. The others died. He was given sponsorship for multiple reconstructive surgeries, and they rebuilt his face. But at the end of the day, he still couldn't speak, and he's given a piece of paper, and he wrote, "God never promised us an easy journey, just a safe arrival." So hang on in there, guys. You will get through.
Amen. Amen.
Hey, folks. As you know, this podcast comes out under the auspices of Great Lakes Outreach, and we're working in Burundi, which is a beautiful country that's got so many challenges. Listen, this is the toughest time of year as a parent because schooling apparently is free in Burundi, but you have to provide the uniform, the books, the pens, that sort of thing. And that prohibits a whole bunch of people going to school. I've got 3 kids, and can you imagine that you can only afford to send 1 kid and you have to choose which one? That's the sort of dilemma lots of our ministry partners are in, and I just cannot imagine being faced with that choice. So we've got just under 1,000 people through the 30 organizations we support out there that we are going to give $50, about £35 each to, so that they can make sure that all their kids get back to school. And we'd love you to be involved in this. We do this every year. And so could you sponsor 1 family or 3 families, 5 families, 10 families, whatever? That'd be wonderful. GreatLakesOutreach.org/back to school if you want to sponsor 1, 3, 5, 10 families, whatever. And so that we can take away the stress of these precious, precious co-workers. You know, one colleague said to me, I hate it that often it's ministry families who are the first to drop out of school. That is so wrong, isn't it? So not on our watch, that's not going to happen. Please support 1 family or a few at GreatLakesOutreach.org/back to school. It's about £40, $50 a pop. That'd be wonderful. And let's see all these kids get a good education. And education means they've got a good chance in life. All right. Thanks so much for your consideration. Now let's get back to the podcast. So, Rachel, what comes next?
So that was it's tough, but it you learn so much, don't you? You learn so much. So that's where I became an academic.
Okay.
So I came back, and first of all, I worked in Monsoon in a clothes shop in Covent Garden because it was just a lovely place to be. I had a great team and had lots of great fun in there. And it didn't matter. There was no emotional weight. Whether somebody buys the overpriced skirt or dress, it really doesn't matter in the eternal kingdom. So, it's a lot easier on a daily basis. And so I loved that. And then I had a really wise manager, Sometimes the Lord speaks through people who they may not actually yet know him, but he still speaks to them. And she sat me down one day and she said, "Rachel, this is great, but you could get trapped here. You could climb the ranks. You could have a great salary, and you'll get trapped. And you've actually got more to you than this," which is really amazing. So she helped to push me on to go back, and I went off to study. And I just kept studying, and that's how I ended up with a PhD, because I really didn't find studying that stressful. Again, no one's emotional life depended on it. Oh, I did a degree, then I went to work for a church for a year, then I came back and did an MA, and then I ended up with a PhD. So I realised that studying was a great way for me to not feel too stressed. For other people, it might be very stressful, but for me, it was great. And I loved my studies, particularly about women who'd been extraordinary. And so I have all these heroines of faith that I have studied. So when in my MA, I just fell in love with Catherine Booth. I read her treatise on women's right to preach the gospel that she had written in 1850, whatever it was. And I cried in an archive that some woman had written this down all those years ago. And it's just extraordinary and life-giving. So that was wonderful to me. And then I ended up in my PhD looking at women who were church planters and preachers from 1900 to 1959 in the UK. And the standard joke when I said that was, well, that's going to be short, because nobody even knew they existed. And so I went round old people's homes and I discovered the most staggering women who'd served Jesus in this country. And their stories were inspirational. So I'd go there like thinking I want academic study and la, la, la. And we'd obviously end up with a time of prayer at the end, all these things that really you're not supposed to do in an academic exercise. But, because I had extraordinary fellowship with these beautiful women who'd served Jesus tirelessly with very little acclaim. What they tended to do was grow churches from 0 to 50. And when it got to 50 people and there was a building and there was enough money, then a man would come in and take over and the women would move on and they would do 0 to 50 again. They were, and we need some of them, they were awe-inspiring. And they just got on with what God had called them. They often had a bicycle so everyone could see them. They'd cycle around. I remember some of the Salvation Army women, they would just put cardboard in their shoes when there were holes in their shoes and carry on. They would sit with the sick when they were dying. There was no great NHS service. So if someone was dying, you nursed them at home and they would just go in and relieve the family. And she said, your sermon on the next day might not be that good but they all knew you'd been sitting up all night nursing someone who was dying. So she said, we just pull it out the back of the magazine and read that and that would be fine. They were staggering. There was a lovely woman called Gladys Gorton. She was part of the Elim church movement, anointed by God. She was healed at the age of 14, dramatically in a George Jeffreys campaign, and then went to the Elim Bible College that was then in Clapham. And then at the age of 16 went off to church plant by herself with a bicycle. So I just think, don't let age ever stop you. And if you ever think of doing so, find out about Gladys Gorton. So she jumped on a bicycle and off she went. She was sent somewhere crazy to try and plant a church. And she's got all this different churches. I mean, she used to be one of their key preachers in Trafalgar Square. They'd have these huge rallies in Trafalgar Square and Gladys would be one of their main preachers in Trafalgar Square. And then eventually she married Arthur and they carried on in continual ministry together where did she call it turnaround? Like one would preach in the morning, one would preach in the evening and the next week they'd swap over. But she knew the Lord. I remember her praying for me. There I was again. And she just there was no stopping them. They're like, we're praying for you. We're praying for your future. And I'm like, I'm just trying to do an academic exercise. None of that happening. But I met these powerhouses of women who'd lived their whole lives for Jesus and just led people to the Lord. They did loads of visiting, loads of time they gave to people and saw that reap such a harvest as they grew these churches. So I looked at the Elim, I looked at the Assemblies of God, and I looked at Baptist and Methodist deaconesses. I looked at the Joyful News Evangelists. We need more of those, Simon. The Joyful News Evangelists. And I found one of them was really fascinating. So I was speaking at a conference about the Joyful News Evangelists. And I was talking about a lady called Mary Dixon, and she just disappeared from the records. So there she was doing great work, traveling around, and then she disappeared from the records. And this man came up to me and said, she didn't stop her ministry. What happened was she went back to one of the places where she'd been ministering and she married Frank the postman. And when she married Frank the postman, she couldn't carry on in ministry because if you were a married woman, you couldn't be in ministry. Well, not in all of the different denominations. You often had to resign your ministry upon marriage, just as you would have done in the civil service or as a teacher. So she had to resign her ministry, but of course she didn't stop. She founded a little mission hall and she carried on. And what would happen was Frank in the morning, the postman, would go door to door around the village where they lived, finding out what was happening because everyone chatted to the postman. And then he'd come back, he'd swap over and hold the home for, and she would then go out and meet and be pastorally there for the people who Frank could be able to point her to in the afternoon. And that is how they grew this extraordinary mission together. And so she hadn't actually disappeared from the records. She'd carried on. It's just that the records didn't carry on with her. So I remember finding that story and thinking, this is extraordinary that I've met this man who was part of her family, who knew that history of how she'd carried on in ministry. So these are my heroines of faith, and I admire them for their courage, their persistence, their faithfulness in a different time and space to ours. But my word, how the Lord used them.
Well, you would love my granny, and I like telling her story because often the bloke gets the credit in the relationship, and he was pretty amazing, Grandpa. But when Grandpa died, Granny, aged 83, said, "Well, I'm just in England. You're just going to stick me in an old age home, whereas in Rwanda, I'm an umud kirchuru, a wise old dame. So she went back out as a widow, and she started a widows ministry. There were 15,000 widows, and her dies from the genocide. 30 came first week, 80, 100, 200, 300, 400, 800. They couldn't fit them in the cathedral. And she let rip for another 3 years until she was 86. And her last day in action on planet Earth, age 86, she preached this packed cathedral, and then she said goodbye like she knew she was going to die. You know, you got au revoir and adieu in French. Au revoir is to the re-seeing, adieu is till God. And hers was an adieu. It's almost like the spirit had whispered in her ear, you're coming home, baby. And last photo of her taking live doing the traditional Inhore dance. After preaching for an hour, she waddled home, had a game of Scrabble, and then went to be with Jesus. And I love that because a few years later, I was preaching in Chicago, some random Winnetka Covenant Church, it was called, some pretty much an all-white crowd. There's one black guy, he came up to me after and said, Gilabot, your grandparents changed my life. And I'm like, 1,000 miles across the seas. It is God's just giving that encouragement. Keep going. This is worth everything. But I love it that Granny, you know, she'd been the dutiful, supportive wife. She hadn't been a doormat by any stretch, but she had supported Grandpa in ministry, and then she totally came into her own. And there are so many wonderful women, unsung heroes of the faith. So it's fantastic to uncover those and be able to just say that lady's name again so we can honour her.
Oh, so Mary Dixon and Gladys Gorton.
Yes.
There's so many of them. And my great grandma. So you've reminded me of my grandma was a street preacher. I've been over in Wales. We've had a Wild Hope wonderful mission for 10 days over there. And my grandmother, her parents were touched by the Welsh revival in sort of Upper Cwmbran. I've been outside her house in Pontnewid, and they had. So my great grandfather, he came to faith in that moment. And then he was holding these prayer meetings in the house. And my great grandmother, she was strict Baptist and having none of this crazy prayer meeting stuff. So she was going around the house slamming the doors when the prayer meetings were on. But of course, the Lord in his graciousness then touched her. She became part of those extraordinary prayer meetings. And then that impacted my grandma and my great uncles. So there were three of them then, Donald, Eunice, and then so we got another story there. But anyway, so we'll follow them up in a minute. So then that's my great grandparents. So then they were there in Wales. He was a founding elder on the first AOG church in the UK, and then they moved from Cwmbran in Wales to Margate, and they're the crooks and they're the founding members of the Assemblies of God Church in Margate. Wow. That's where my grandma was then a beach preacher and a street preacher. So I was really inspired by my grandma, and she's the one who had all the contacts into sort of the Elim and the AOG movement. She's the one who knew who Gladys Gorton was and who we needed to talk to. And she had been prayed for the day before her wedding, Smith Wigglesworth, who's actually quite, again, a famous preacher. And in that movement that moment of movement of the Spirit of God in our land, and Lord, do it again, Smith Wigglesworth came into the kitchen and prayed for my grandma. And he prayed for my grandma and my grandma's children and children's children. So I love to think that I have been prayed for by Smith Wigglesworth in that moment, which is so beautiful. Then grandma moved over to Essex, but my great grandmother, so this is Martha Crook, she died preaching in the pulpit. And I think this is the way to go, Simon.
Yes.
So she went to, I think it was a big women's rally that she was going to again, that she'd spoken to before. And they said they really hoped that this time nothing untoward would happen, because the time before she'd stubbed her toe, I think, coming in or out of the pulpit. But this time, and I guess it isn't untoward really, I think it's stunningly beautiful. She looked up. She was preaching on the faithfulness of Esther. She looked up, she had a vision of Jesus and a vision of glory, and she died in the pulpit.
Wow.
And they had to carry her out. Quite extraordinary, but I lived with this heritage from my grandma and my great-grandma, and I lived with this heritage of Wales, and so I loved being back there and just praying for that land again.
Yeah.
And I used to ask my grandma, well, what were these meetings like, Grandma? Like, what happened? What did you do? And all I would ever get from Grandma, she would sit there and she would look at me and she would just go, oh, the glory. And I'd be like, Grandma, yeah, but what happened? What did you do? And she'd just go, oh, the glory. And it just, obviously, that sense of the awe and the presence of God and the glory and the goodness of who he was that had overwhelmed her at that time. And then if you go to the AOG website, the Assemblies of God, you will find Donald and Eunice are up there as heroes and heroines of the faith. Wonderful. And so Donald would be my great uncle, and he married an amazing woman called Eunice, and they were missionaries all their lives, and they are on the AOG website. And I think there is so much to be found in the heroes and heroines. You know, if you're having a day when you're not sure, look someone up who did great things for Jesus, read their stories, find again, you know, sometimes we think we're the first generation to, I don't know, experience whatever. We are so not. God has done extraordinary things in the past. Yeah. We're following in the footsteps, they say, don't they, the footsteps of giants. And so I constantly find inspiration when I go back. And these people are the people who inspire me to go on.
Yeah. What a privilege, that heritage. So coming further forward now, I just thinking of our availability to God, those people, that they were just available to God. What's that look like? How has God used you in your availability to him?
Well, like sometimes, you know, you're really busy. So I lead Hope Together. That's a wonderful charity. It takes me all over the place and I love it. Speaking on evangelism. I also am married to a pastor. So we're part of Christ Church here in London, Spitalfields. But we have an evangelism team that started, which I love. We go out and we just have a Bible table. And the other day, you know, everything was busy and I'd gone off. I needed to talk to this person, I needed to talk to that person. And I eventually, you know, get to the Bible table and they are closing down the Bible table. And I'm like, oh, guys, please, I just need to be out here for 30 minutes. Could you just stay with me? And they're like, Rachel, it's been really unfruitful today. And there are days like that. You know, there's just days when it doesn't seem to be that fruitful. And I'm like, yeah, but please stay with me. I just need to be out here. I just need to touch this, you know. I need 30 minutes of this. So they're like, okay. So I'm standing there and I'm giving out a little card. I stop this guy on the street and I chat away to him and I'm like, you know, chat away and I'm like, why don't you come? Why don't you come to church tonight? And give him a Mark's gospel, and then I get him to chat to somebody else, and I get him to chat to somebody else. And he comes and he rocks up to the 5 o'clock service. And he gives his life to Jesus, and his whole life is transformed. And there are so many reasons why that could not have happened. Number 1, I was tired. Number 2, I was busy. And number 3, they were about to shut down the table. It took them faith to stay with me on a day that hadn't been fruitful. It took me that step of, I'm still going to do this, even though there's so many other things going on. And he then came bowling up to me, just, you know, like the next time I saw him, he said, I just want to thank you for stopping me on the street. I just want to thank you for stopping me on the street. And he's gone from strength to strength, Simon. He's just grown in his faith. He's been totally transformed by Jesus. And so, you know what? That thing of being available, sometimes it's like sheer intentionality. I am going to do this. I'm going to get there and I'm going to do this. And sometimes it's the whisper. The other one, I little theme here. I was running around to church, the evening service, a little bit late, and I'm running past the side. So we live behind the church. I'm running past the side of the building, and there was a guy just sitting on a windowsill, kind of in the church on the windowsill, like obviously outside the church, but kind of in. And I thought, well, he's kind of in. So I stop and chat to him. What's he sketching? La la la. And then I said, why don't you come in the church? The church is, you know, we're happening. We've got service on. Why don't you actually come in? You're half in anyway. And he said, oh, I've never been to church. I said, oh, come in, you know, you're really welcome. We'd love to have you. He said, yeah, I might do that. He said, I'll finish my sketch and then I'll come round. So I sat on the front steps thinking, will he come, will he not? And he did. He came round, walked in. And then, you know, those moments where you sit down and then you're like, oh goodness, I've brought someone who's never been to church before. And we have this amazing, passionate youth pastor and he's preaching on evangelism. And I'm like, I'm really not sure if this is the best evangelistic strategy here. But needless to say, he was so passionate that he preached the gospel, because really that's why we need evangelism. So actually, it was quite extraordinary. And then the guy looks at his watch and goes, oh, I'm really going to have to go because he's got friends waiting for him. So I walk out with him and I give him one of our gospels. And he's like, do you know what? I'm going to read. He's going back. He said he was going back to Australia. I'm reading this on the plane on the way home. He said, and I am going to find a church when I get back to Australia. We have to be available. We just do not know when those encounters are going to happen. Sometimes it's intentionality. You know, get a team together in your church. Like, we've got worship teams, we've got children and families teams, we've got teams for everything. If your church hasn't got an evangelism team, hey, get in touch with us, but get an evangelism team. Do something, get intentional. And then on the other hand, be available and listen to the nudges of the Spirit of God.
Simon, thank you so much for these inspiring, varied, God-glorifying podcasts. I listen from here in South Asia when doing the washing up. I used to listen in the car to and from work in the UK. But when faith wanes or tires, they never fail to inject some oxygen back in and ultimately lift my eyes up to God and His purposes, what He does through so many different people and situations, rich, poor, young, old, women, men, from all nations and backgrounds. I love it. Well done. I wish there was an equivalent for people here.
So you tell us a bit about the Talking Jesus, because that is inspiring, encouraging.
Yeah. So I love research, Simon. And so I'm the author of the Talking Jesus research. It's really simple. We wanted to find out what was happening outside the church. We often study what's happening inside. But you know what? What we really needed to know was what was happening outside. So we first did it in 2015, and we brought it to a resounding group of the great and the good from across all the denominations in the UK. And they said that can't be true. And the reason they said it couldn't be true was it showed how many people wanted to know about Jesus. And no one believed that anybody outside the church actually wanted to know about Jesus. So they said, you're going to have to do it again. So we went off and we did it with a bigger sample, and we did it again. And anyone who knows anything about research knows that it will come back with the same results if it's been well done. And of course it did. And people began to believe that people outside the church might want to know about Jesus. Not all of them, but some of them. And that's always our job, find the open. And then we redid it in 22. And to everyone's surprise, even more people wanted to know about Jesus than in 2015. And so if a Christian's talk to somebody about their faith, 1 in 3 of those people would like to know about Jesus, and 1 in 3 of them would like to experience or encounter him for themselves. Well, that I can guarantee to anybody listening that people right now in their community, if they're in the UK, there is a whole group of them who genuinely want to know about Jesus. It isn't everybody. It wasn't everybody for the Apostle Paul or even for Jesus. But what I can guarantee is that there really is a group of people who both want to know about Jesus or want to experience or encounter him. So we need to make ourselves more obvious. We need to make our welcome larger and greater. Do you know, lots of people don't know that they're welcome to come to church, and nobody ever invited them. We just had the Bible Society research called The Quiet Revival, and that just backs this up beautifully. That people would love to be invited to church. 1 in 3 people would love an invite to church. Go invite 3 people. 1 of them wants to come. Don't worry about the other 2. God's got another plan for them, but let's start with the 1 who's open. 1 in 4 would love to read the Bible. So why don't you give them a Bible so they can read about it? Offer to read it with them. Give them a life of Jesus. 2 in 3 would love to be prayed for. Well, what's stopping us? 2 in 3 of the UK population who don't currently attend church would absolutely love it if a Christian would offer to pray for them. That is like a game change. So Talking Jesus has been built on by others. We know that there is an open harvest field. And in particular, when you go into the younger generation, it's almost like 50-50. It's almost half of the younger generation who would love to know more or find out about Jesus. We have never had such a plentiful harvest field. So we just need to get out there and discover these people who want to know or encounter Jesus.
And I love the analogy. It's such a simple one of walking through an apple orchard and shaking the tree. And if the fruit is ripe, it falls. And if it's not ripe, don't yank it, because it's going to be false fruit anyway if you manage to tear it off. And that's so liberating because And I know you experienced it. You've told some stories now, and I've got stories of just, if that person is right when you have a conversation with, it's a little shake and it's just smooth and it gets there, and you have a coherent discussion within a matter of minutes. You can end up praying with them and just having this experiencing this extraordinary intimacy on a train or on a park bench or on the street, walking your dog, all sorts of different contexts. So guys, just have the courage. 1 in 3. I mean, goodness. So, and God wants to use you. You don't have to leave it, and we mustn't leave it to the whoever they are, the super evangelists, whatever. No, all of us, we can do it. So you've just been in Wales with Rob Colwell and a bunch of other people, Fusion, and so any great stories from there?
It was amazing. It was a morning service in one of the churches, and 8 people gave their lives to Jesus. You can't but get excited. And then on the Wednesday night, another 3 or 4 people gave their lives to Jesus. We went out to the park, popped up a little Bible table. Again, we don't need to be complicated, just really clear, actually, authentic and clear. Don't need to be complicated. Popped up a Bible table, put some Bibles on it, and we're talking away to people. And I love it. We were working with an amazing church. Well, we had worked with 3 amazing churches, actually, in the valleys. It was beautiful. They're already like on it. We were able just to come in and work with them. So you've got a solid invite of where these people can go. And so I was talking to one guy, got talking to him, and he's like, yeah, but I've just done so much in my life, and and I'm like, oh great, I need this. And I'm like beckoning one of the other guys over, and I'm like, you come and talk to him, John, you come and talk to him, because I know he's been inside for 6 years and he's now resoundingly found Jesus, and he's off to Bible college soon. He hasn't got a GCSE to his name, and yet he's going to go to Bible college. He's really intelligent, really able. And he was brilliant, because I could actually pass that conversation on to someone who could totally speak to him. So as I did that, I then moved on, and then this guy's girlfriend arrives. And she's got like a 21st headband on, because it was her 21st birthday. So I get chatting to her, and then I'm able to give her, I just had the most extraordinary time with her. She said, her dad died when she was 10, but he'd been a Christian, and that had really influenced her. But then she hadn't done anything since, because obviously life had been very complicated since. So I was able to give her, again, a beautiful Mark's Gospel for her 21st birthday present and say, do you know what? This is the best gift I could ever give you. You need to read this. And she'd been talking about, she so wanted to get in touch, obviously, with her dad. And I said, you don't want to do that. Your dad doesn't want you, what he wants you to do is get in touch with that Heavenly Father, and was able to just talk to her about that and pray with her and give her a Bible. So the pair of them, both so interested, just such a beautiful encounter, and just, standing in a park in the, so simple. And lots of other people walk past, loads of other people might just take one thing, but then you have these extraordinarily beautiful conversations. And if you multiply that out, because there was a whole pile of us out, there's so many of those extraordinary conversations. And another one was like, oh yeah, no, my friend goes to that church. Oh, I know I need to go. And she took a gospel, and she's like, I really know. And I'm like, well, read this, and you need to turn up, and who's your friend? And let's make sure that friend, invites you. And again, you're finding others, as you say, fruit's not ripe. They're going to walk past politely. You haven't offended them, but you've asked. And then on the street, sometimes you're just, I spent a long time talking to one man, and I don't think there was an enormous impact, but I must have talked to him for over an hour, because he so wanted to talk. And he was telling me all this poem he'd written about his philosophy for life, and I was just trying to help him. His mother was really, really committed Christian, and I was able to sort of to talk that through with him. And he didn't resoundingly give his life to Jesus on the spot, Simon, but it was well worth that pause. You know how Jesus would sit somewhere with someone and be there and be available and pray for them and talk with them. Oh yeah, and that's just my stories, and other people have this whole, like, we were sort of 30 of us out and about on the streets, and I spoke to one amazing girl who was Hindu, and she said to me, no, because I thought, I said, all your family, she said, they're all Hindu. She said, but I'm allowed to believe anything I like. And then her question to me was more than once, but can you tell me again why Jesus died? What a great question. So I was able to share with her, why Jesus died, and talk that through with her on the street. Oh, honestly, the harvest is plentiful.
Yeah. Come on, folks, the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few, but we ask the Lord of the harvest, come on, Lord, send us out. And let's be part of this glorious harvest. Okay, we're coming towards an end. Where are you now? What do you get up to with Jesus? And then give us some parting words of encouragement.
So obviously I lead this charity called Hope Together. It's a beautiful venture of faith where this year our big target is 100,000 gospels to go out through Christians and local churches. And we're at 90,000 already. Brilliant. So we've got to grow the target. We're going to have an amazing gospel for Christmas. We've got this designer who's just done such a staggering job. The younger generation, one of their languages is design. So you can't hand them something naff, it's going in the recycling and it doesn't say value. It's like one of their cultural values. So like when you're going on mission, as much as you can, you'll understand this, you understand the culture into which you're working. And then as people come to faith and you take them on a journey of discipleship, that's actually where you maybe unpack some of those values. But this is a value for them, design. So we're working with a fantastic young designer to create a beautiful gospel for Christmas so that, hey, we've done 90,000. We would love to get to way over 100,000 now. And people can do that in so many different ways. So that's what we get up to as Hope. Everything we do as Hope Together is to encourage. We want everyone everywhere to know Jesus. And we work in partnership with local churches because they're the hands and feet in Jesus right across the UK. And it is a delight to work in partnership. So would love to catch up with anybody out there who's thinking about how might I begin to do this? That's been really inspirational, but I just don't quite know where to start. Then, come and find out more because we can help you start from just adopting a local bench near you where you just go and sit and are available to be there for Jesus, to see who Jesus sits next to you. That is my John 4 model, like a well. Nothing we do is complicated because we don't need complicated things. There's not a whizzy-bangy technique. There's prayer, there's listening to the Spirit, there's being available, but there is putting ourselves out there and being intentional. And so that's what we're really committed to. And we would love to partner. If you've got a church and you want a bit of inspiration on where you start, what this might look like, we would love to see even more of the lives of Jesus go into people's hands. We'd love to see people sitting on benches and having divine encounters. We've got churches have prophesied over their benches, named their benches and are going out, regularly for their benches. Oh, and I've got this staggering story about bench. Can I fit this one in?
Go for it.
So I was with speaking to there's a network of churches called Pioneer. So I'm down there speaking to all the leaders of the Pioneer churches and they're all pioneering. So I'm out there speaking about, how open people are, talking about the Talking Jesus research, talking about things like you could sit on a bench, you could give people, all these things. And one guy gets really excited. We have a bit of a break and we go to seminars. So I off to go and talk in a seminar. And one guy, he's like, this is just too good. If these people are open, I haven't got time to get to a seminar. So he goes out into the local park. We were down in Southampton. He goes out to a local park and he asks the Lord, where shall I go? And he sits on a bench next to this guy. And this guy starts to chat to him and he says, it opens a conversation, he explains why he's down in Southampton. And this guy begins to share with him how dreadful life is. And he's lost custody of children. He's been inside in prison. His life he's at the end, he said. And he really has wanted to take his life on many occasions. He said, but for the last year, he's been kept alive by one thing. At 3:16 every morning, he is woken up. And every morning at 3:16, he gets woken up. He has no idea why at 3:16 he's been woken up for a whole year. But because he so wants to know why he's been woken up at 3:16 every day for a year, it's kept him alive. What's more now, his dad has started to wake up at 3:16 in the morning as well. And so he looks at this guy and goes, you're religious. Please help me. Does 3:16 mean anything to you? And this guy he had these big cargo pants and he pulls out his Bible and he opens John 3:16 and he helps this guy and he leads this guy to Jesus on a bench in a park. And he helps to connect him. He knows where the church is in Southampton, where to send him, where to get him help. And this guy is like, the guy was saying, I can't, I've just done so much wrong. He said, no, let's just reread this verse. Let's just reread this verse. For God so loved the world that whoever believes in him and trusts in him will have eternal life. And he leads them to Jesus. Then he comes bursting back into the conference after the seminars, and he gets up and he shares this story. You couldn't ask for greater inspiration to turn a whole pile of churches out into action than that story. Yeah. So I love it. It's so inspirational. He followed the prompting of Spirit. He made himself available. He went and sat on a bench and he saw what Jesus could do. And then he said, that is how much God loves these people. God loves the people outside. He's got the 99, but he is searching for the one. Yeah. And he loves that one so much that he would trouble to keep him alive by waking him up at 3:16 until he could get one of his followers to sit down next to him. And we need to be available. We just need to be available.
Come on, guys. God just wants you don't have to be, it's cliche, not ability, but availability. And we can all sit on a park bench. We can all say, Lord, who do you want me to talk to today? Rachel, you've provided loads of encouragement and seeds and challenges. So listen, I'll put all your details in the blurb for people to get in touch with you and in touch with the charity. And just want to say thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Simon. It's been a joy and a privilege.
Brilliant. Guys, gossip this podcast, please, with friends. It'd be great if you get another 3-5 subscribers. That's how we're building. It's amazing how far this is reaching now. I'd love you to give us a great review on Spotify or iTunes. I want to thank Adam Thomas Steer for the editing, Mike Sandeman for the mixing, and then next week we've got another fantastic guest. Very different journey. They're all so different, aren't they? But in the meantime, God bless you. Have a good week, and toodaloo.